Coach,
How we doing? Good. Quiet in here today.
on these last OTAs going into mini camp next week, what is it you hope to accomplish and kind of where you want to be going into that mini camp next week?
Well, a big part of what we try to do with OTAs is we try to get our installation in, and we have an installation schedule on offense, on defense, and in the kicking game. We try to allocate each of these OTA days for those. Some of it's just getting our base stuff in, some of it's situational. So we'll try to run the gamut through the first 9 days of OTAs and then get a chance to go back in the mini camps and review that stuff. And then that schedule will be very similar once we start training camps. So you're really laying the foundation for your offensive, defensive, and then kicking game systems.
So does minicamp go back to zero? Do you start back over again when you go to minicamp, or do you continue that path?
It's not quite as clean as starting back to zero because you only have 3 practices. But in some way, shape, or form, Tuesday will reflect the early part of the installation, Wednesday will reflect the middle part, and Thursday will reflect the later part of the installation.
How is the playbook acquisition coming along for all of your rookies? Are they coming, acclimating themselves to the playbook?
Oh, it's a
pretty
challenge. I think one of the biggest difficulties that a rookie has is they get that day 1 installation and they feel like they got it down. And they get through that practice and then they go home that night and they look at their iPad or their notebook and they have day 2 come the next day. And then, okay, now we've got to work on day 2 and we're still responsible for day 1. And then, oh, by the way, day 3's coming. And it can pile up. And at some point, you see this with all young players, it starts to add up and they start playing more slowly. So we believe in how we install. It's very repetitious. We're aggressive in doing it, but we're going to come back to it. We're aggressive, we're going to come back to it. So they got to try to keep up. The ones who keep up the best typically play the best. But it's challenging, and they got to make sure they stay on top of it. They can't come into the meeting the morning of a practice day and see the information for the first time. They have to be ahead of the game, they have to study it, they have to have their questions ready and be prepared for that day's work.
Jonathan missed so much practice time last couple of years. Is it frustrating for him to be injured again and miss some time like that?
Well, you have to ask him about his frustration. We'd love to see him out there playing. And the interesting thing about Matt is every time we've given him an opportunity, he seems to do a pretty good job, whether it's in practice or some of the scrimmage situations that he's been in. And he just needs time on task. He needs to get out there. And it seems to me that he's got a real good approach mentally. He continues to work. He doesn't seem outwardly frustrated. I'm sure he is, but he's just got to continue to work through it, get himself healthy. And we're going to try to give him every chance to show us what he can do. And he's working to get to that point.
From a coaching standpoint, though, do you find yourself frustrated? Well, I know he wants to be out there, but when you give him all those opportunities, what is the patient?
Yeah, our attitude is try to give him an opportunity to show us what he can do. We've tried to do that. We feel like what he's done up to this point is worthy of having some patience with him. What we've seen in practice or some of those other situations I was talking about, we move on, obviously. We move on with other players whenever somebody gets hurt. Next man up, injuries provide opportunities. So depending on where that injury is, different guys will get a chance to show what they can do. It's better to be out there practicing and playing. And unfortunately for Matt, that hasn't been the case a lot in his career with us. But we'll continue to be patient, make sure he gets healthy, and we'll see when the time comes if he can compete for one of these jobs.
Jason, when you were scouting Zach Martin, did you envision him playing some center? Was that something you talked about? Is this something that you, as a staff, maybe the last couple of weeks, you thought about?
Well, I think one of the things that we thought about him when he was coming out was his versatility. He played left tackle at Notre Dame, he started 52 games. But I think we all felt like he could play tackle, he could play guard, and he could play center. And he's a really, really smart football player. You can tell that in how he played in college tape. You can tell that from minute 1 since he's been here, both in the classroom and on the field. The game comes very easily to him from a mental standpoint. He doesn't seem to struggle with the different looks, playing different spots. There's a lot of poise and confidence. Now he's got a long way to go, don't get me wrong. He's young to this whole thing. He's had about 10 or so practices with us, and he has a long way to go. But the versatility, we viewed him as a guy who potentially could play 5 offensive line spots when we drafted him. He's certainly done a very good job at guard. Try to give him some snaps at center as well.
Coach, how hard is it for a young player, and especially an undrafted player,
to make an impression when they can't hit anybody out here?
Well, I think you can make an impression a lot of different ways. You know, we had a guy who was brought into our rookie mini camp as a tryout player, Patman, and you know, he showed up. And I think we have a track record in this organization of trying to give players opportunities regardless of where they come from. It's my day one speech to our players. It really doesn't matter where you come from. If you're a first round pick or we signed you 15 minutes ago, we're going to give you an opportunity to show what you can do. And if you take advantage of that, we're going to give you more opportunities. So we all understand what the nature of practice is. It's helmets and jerseys. So we have to practice the right way, but within that context, there's certainly plenty of opportunity to show what you can do.
Brandon Wheaton's about eight practices in or something like that. How's he progressed, and just kind of your impressions of Brandon?
Yeah, Brandon's done a nice job. You know, he's a guy that you know his history. He was a baseball player for 5 years, you know, coming out of high school and got to football at the college level a little bit late. But was successful at Oklahoma State and really was thrown into the fire a little bit in Cleveland. And you know, we saw potential in him coming out. There's a reason he was drafted, I think, with the 18th pick of the first round. And he has ability. He can throw the football. He has a calmness and a poise about him. The biggest thing that he needs is an opportunity to play. He needs to take a ton of snaps. And that's a lot of quarterbacks. He certainly falls into that category. I think he's picked things up very well mentally. He just needs to take more snaps and somehow, some way, you know, transfer that and translate that into what he's doing on the field. You certainly see his ability to throw the football. He's a good athlete and get out of trouble. And you know, he just needs to play more football.
You talk about being thrown in the fire like he was. At this stage, do you do anything to build a player's confidence back up after a bad situation, or is it strictly just the repetition of practice and getting a feel and kind of building it back up that way?
Oh, I think it's a combination. You know, we believe strongly in how we coach our players and how we coach our quarterbacks. And we feel like we provide a good environment for quarterbacks to play well. And you know, you put pressure on quarterbacks. You know, they need to know the offense inside and out. They need to know what the defense is trying to get accomplished. They need to be really strong mentally. They need to be mentally tough. They need to be sharp. So we try to challenge them that way to prepare them as well as we can. You know, with a guy like Brandon, he needs to understand our offense. He needs to take snaps in this system, you know, like Tony Romo has for the last 7 or 8 years. And the more you do that, the more comfortable you're going to get, the more confident you're going to get. And he's in the early stages of that. But we like the environment we create for our quarterbacks. We think they thrive in it, and he's getting a chance to be around it. He's done a good job so far.
Have you seen enough of him that he can be a primary backup?
You know, we're just trying to really work our players as best we can through these OTAs. We're not really caught up in depth charts. You know, some players are available, some players aren't. And we're just trying to get him acclimated. He hasn't even gone through the whole installation schedule yet. So he's taken a lot of the first reps in practice. Tony's really just gone through the walkthrough portion of practice. So Brandon's got a lot of good work. Caleb Haney's gotten some good work. Dustin Ball's gotten some good work. And at the end of it, we'll pull back and evaluate what their tape looks like and start making some of those decisions.
Do you have a sense of how many players who have not been available in OTAs will be on the field next week?
No, I don't think it'll change that much. A lot of the players who haven't been here in OTAs, they'll probably continue their off-season schedule. A lot of guys who haven't been practicing have been limited, so they've been doing individual stuff. We get a chance to see them move around a little bit. Most of them are coming off of some kind of surgery where we don't want to put them in a situation where they're competing against somebody across the ball, but they're making progress nonetheless. I'd have to go down the list and see specifically the changes, but for the most part, next week's tempo and formats pretty much a continuation of this week.
Will it change for Tony next week?
We'll take them day by day like we're doing all the other guys, but I wouldn't see it changing dramatically.
How valuable is Dan Bailey from a roster makeup standpoint? I mean, you don't have to basically allocate other spots, you know, the kickers to try them out.
Yeah, I think he's valuable because he's really damn good first, and at what he does. You know, he's as good a kicker as there is in the league. You know, he might do what he does as well as anybody on our team. And he's just a really, really good player at a very important position. And then to your point, you know, he's a guy who can not only kick your field goals and extra points, but he can kick off. So, you know, he saves you that roster spot that way. But he's just a really good football player. His approach is unbelievable. You know, his preparation is impeccable. His commitment to being as good as he can be is a great example to all of us. So, he's really, really a good football player. We're lucky to have him.
And going back to 2011, you had 5 guys here at one point that were kickers. And now you don't have to roster spots.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how important is that, especially where you're trying to kind of grow certain areas like the defensive line?
Yeah, I mean, you always want to address important positions of need, and all positions are important. When you don't have a guy at a particular spot, you got to make sure you allocate the necessary resources. So back then, we really didn't have an established kicker yet. We're fortunate that we have one now, because his spot is critical, and that does in fact free up some roster spots for some of the other places where we need to, again, allocate some more people.
What attracted you guys to McLean?
He was a highly touted guy coming out, drafted relatively high. We saw a lot of things that we liked on his college tape, and we saw some things we liked on his pro tape. He just wasn't consistent. I think he was banged up a little bit, and he's somebody that kind of flashes at you. It's really good to have him here, to see him through an off-season program, to see him in OTAs, to see him day after day after day, and you kind of take some of that stuff that he flashed, and you see it on a more consistent basis. And you try to teach him and coach him the way we want him to play. And he's one of those guys that doesn't say anything to anybody. He's just quiet and goes to work every day, but he's absolutely one of the guys that has shown up the most during these first 8 OTA practices. Great intensity in all that he does. He flashes some ability, and we really like how he goes about his business.
Is it tough to get a read on him if you come playing the nose in the 3-4 to think, oh, can he do this in 4-3, and what spots you can mix him in at?
Yeah, and so you try to make your best evaluation and look at some of his physical traits. And he's certainly not the typical zero nose tackle in a 3-4 defense where he just kind of sits over the center in 2 gaps. That hasn't been his mode since he's been playing. He's always been a guy who's been on an edge, being able to play upfield a little bit. We're definitely seeing some of that through these OTA practices.
Coach, you said every position is important, obviously, but with 3 first-rounders on the offensive line, would you say that's the most important?
No, I wouldn't say that's the most important. Having a really good offensive line, though, makes your team a heck of a lot better. And we feel like we've been able to transform that front here in the last 2 or 3 years in a way that's really going to help our football team. We had some really good players playing offensive line for us 5-6 years ago. They were older guys, they were of the same generation. They were big, strong guys, they were pros, but they all got old at the same time. We had to really restructure that group, and it takes time to do that. We played with a lot of different people over the last 4 or 5 years up front, and we were trying to allocate resources to it because it just helps everybody play better. If your offensive line is playing well, your runner's going to play better, your quarterback's going to play better. As a result, your receivers are going to play better, your defense is going to play better. And sometimes we felt like we were in situations where we couldn't do some of the things that we wanted to do, running the football. At the end of ball games, we couldn't control the line of scrimmage the way we needed to. And we feel like really addressing that over time with significant resources, 3 first-round picks. We feel like that's a worthwhile endeavor to help the offensive line because it's going to help everybody else.
Do you feel you're at the same stage with the defensive line now as far as that transition period with where you were when you began to work on rebuilding the offensive line?
Yeah, there is an analogy there. A lot of veteran players who are really good of the same generation, and you have to transition. You have to get younger. I think we went from being maybe the 2nd or 3rd oldest team in the league 3 or 4 years ago. Now we're the 2nd or 3rd youngest team in the league. And if you look at our roster, we like that. That's what we're trying to do. We want to do that up front. You got to keep them coming. The defensive line is one of those positions. You can't have enough of those guys. Some of the best teams that I've been around, some of the best teams we've competed against, seem to have a boatload of these defensive linemen. They constantly come at you. So another reason you want to have a lot of good offensive linemen to compete with these guys. So we're trying to get ourselves to that point. We drafted DeMarcus Lawrence in the 2nd round for a reason. I feel like he's a good player, an important position for us. We just got to keep him coming.
Is that a position where, like you just said, you can't have enough guys, and obviously what you went through last year, but some positions, if you stack up too many players, then you don't have enough reps to work through and find out no one emerges. Is it a little bit different in the defensive line?
Yeah, I think the best defensive lines I've been around are ones that have wave players. If you think back to the the 90s, when this team was winning Super Bowls, there were 8 legit defensive linemen rotating through in games. Jim Jeffco's playing 12 plays in a game. It's ridiculous. And you guys know all the names, Leon Lett and Chad Hennings, and Jimmy Jones, to go with Charles Haley, Tony Tolbert, Tony Casillas, Russell Maryland. You think about all those guys that were playing. And if you can have some of those guys play 30 snaps instead of 60 snaps, or 15 snaps instead of 30 snaps, you're going to be so much better. And the best teams in this league have always had a lot of guys up front. And the game is won and lost up front, always has been won and lost up front, and always will be won and lost up front. If you don't have good offensive and defensive linemen, your skill guys can't do what they need to do. So we've tried to do that. We've tried to kind of restructure our fronts over the last few years and build our team the right way.
Speaking of Leon Lett, Coach, position coaching is very important. What kind of impact do you see like ex-Cowboys like Leon Lett having, since they're familiar with the system, to help out some of your younger guys?
Leon's just a really good football coach. I was fortunate to play with him. We were teammates for 8 years here in Dallas, and he's always someone I had a great deal of respect for as a person and as a player. He was a dominant player in his day. But he's really, he has a tremendous desire to be a coach. He worked very hard to kind of get himself to this point. He was an intern with us in training camp a few years ago and just made such a great impression on so many people, his fellow coaches, the players. You could just see how the players responded to him. He's learning the art of some of the things that he didn't really grow up with as a former player. But he's somebody who has such great wisdom about people, about the game, and obviously, when he gets down in the stance as a 3 technique, he paints the picture of what you want. And demonstration is a big part of coaching, and his ability to communicate what these guys need to do is really pretty darn good. So I've learned a heck of a lot from him. It's been a great addition to our staff.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Good to see you guys.